All right, we are back here with episode 2 of Liberty Denied, and that intro, that music is that good breakdown music in a metal song, just gets you pumped right here, ready to talk about the bullshit going on in the world. Of course, with me as always is going to be Mr. Dirty Dirt here. How's it going, man? How you doing?
Going pretty good.
Good, good. Got
Doing good.
a lot of shit happening in the world,
hmm
and
Always.
always has been. Always will be. It's a relatively peaceful time throughout human history, but of course, crazy shit is always around. So we're always going to have plenty to talk about anytime you talk about these subjects. We have a couple of topics to talk about here. The main ones being obviously Joe Biden is president-elect, but it's still where, like, who would have thought it would have lasted this long before it was like officially called? Obviously, some of like the news sources have called it, and Joe Biden is going to be the president. You said, "Oh, what is happening here? How did Trump shoot up to 232 electoral votes? Some other states must have been called. I see Biden still at 290. They must have called something relatively large for Trump, right? Because Trump was at like 217."
I'm not seeing it on that list.
No.
Unless Georgia went.
They called North Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. North Carolina. Georgia, I am seeing here, Georgia is still not called. Biden has what is that? About a 15,000 point lead. Arizona, still not called. That's an 11,000 point lead. Man, these are close races, but obviously it looks like, barring whatever craziness comes out of the lawsuits and all that stuff going on, I can't imagine the trial and the case that has to be made here to flip. It's at least like 3 states.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be if he's got 290? Pennsylvania is 20. So that still, if he lost Pennsylvania, if they flip Pennsylvania, Biden would still be on 270. So you would have to flip at least a couple of states and take back Georgia, which looks like Biden has like a tiny lead. But again, winning's winning. You got a tiny lead. You got a tiny lead. But so that's what it's looking like there. But we do have some concerns. I know both of us had some concerns going into this about what a President Biden would do is in terms of policy, foreign policy, domestic policy. We've got a whole list of things here to refresh our memory on some of the things that Biden has said. I actually did have a couple of videos that I'll grab really quick that I was recently reminded of for some takes Joe Biden had regarding guns, if we need to bring some of those back up, because he's not exactly all there, and he's not exactly always coherent. But the overall sense of this is an administration that would not be gun friendly is pretty obvious, just from plenty of the things that he said. If I can find some of these videos, I mean, I could YouTube them easy because they're very
Well,
easy
he
to
did,
find.
when he was campaigning anyway, he did bring Beto out there pretty much saying he was going to be his gun czar.
Yeah.
So,
This is the guy that that's going to be in charge of my gun control plan. If, for anybody who even somewhat paid attention, that in any way likes guns, is like, oh, okay. So this is the, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15s, and yeah, this is that guy. This is that guy when everybody all my lefty friends would give me shit for voting for Ted Cruz for that Senate race when it was him and Beto. I feel no shame in it whatsoever. Just don't. But like that, and that was a relatively close race. It was like 2.5% that Beto lagged him in. Like, sorry, man. I mean, I'm not the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but there's just some things where it's just like, I'm sorry, man. Sorry, got to cross some lines. Got to cross some lines and put some complaints. Now, obviously, I have a lot of complaints about Ted Cruz, but it's not enough for something like that. I mean, it's way easier for me to look over some failings of Ted Cruz than to go into this ultra woke, ridiculous I mean, there's no other way around it. And we're going to get into this. It's just straight up authoritarian shit when you're talking about, no, you will be forced to sell, or to, I don't even know if his thing was, yeah, it was a forced buyback. But the thing is, whether they force you to sell the guns to them or they just come and take them, it's still the muscle of the state being used on millions of Americans that own any of these assault weapons, which basically, for people who aren't aware of this, what they define as an assault weapon is basically any semi-automatic rifle, especially ones that look scary. They don't have a very good metric for what exactly is an assault weapon. Now, when Reagan was passing in '86, when he was adding machine guns to the National Firearms Act, those were referred as assault weapons. So there's kind of a poisoning the well situation you get here when you talk about semi-automatic rifles being assault weapons, when sort of the public conscience is assault weapons, or they interchangeably use terms like weapons of war. There's all kinds of buzzwords around these weapons. I know Beto has used the weapons of war thing, or military style, even though militaries don't use AR-15s. Our military doesn't use semi-automatic rifles, or at least those anyways. Mm-hmm. So it's not actually that we have weapons of war on the street. That's just state narrative to scare people into thinking like, oh my God, who would ever need a machine gun? And it's really incredible when you start talking to people that don't know much about guns, how uninformed, or excuse me, no, not uninformed, how intentionally misinformed people are. When you talk about playing on the intellectual sluggishness of the American population, the gun debate is just full of all that. And of course, Biden being president, Biden being extremely anti-gun, and not just Joe Biden, but also his vice president, which is basically every complaint I have of Joe Biden, she is worse on everything.
Yeah, she's the amplification
of
the issues.
I can't think of one thing that I would say she's better on. And you and I have had this conversation in private, even with Joe Biden. The stuff that I would agree with a left-winger on, I don't even get that out of the Joe Biden administration. Like, you don't even get, like, let's say if it was Bernie Sanders. So we would be completely 180 opposed to anything pretty much economically that Bernie Sanders would want to do. Mm-hmm. But I know, I'll at least speak for myself personally, but Bernie would, at least you could get the more likely to end wars, more likely to decriminalize or legalize drugs, or at least some drugs, maybe some criminal justice reform. There's at least things like that, but all three of those things that I just mentioned, there's not a chance you're going to get that with a Biden administration. So you're not even going to get the good things from the left wing out of a Joe Biden presidency. At the same time, you're not going to get the absolute worst aspects of like a Bernie Sanders or an AOC style economy take. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to get that. I mean, you're not going to get good things out of Joe Biden in terms of economics, but there's certainly different degrees of bad that you could really get there, especially with how many people are starting to want some of these bad things. But there are some bad things in a Biden administration. I guess if we started from the top, I'll tell you what, a good place I wanted to start, and it might be a really good place to start, is I've got to take umbrage with a celebrity that I've always been a real big fan of. They've been a huge inspiration for me in both the religious sphere and in politics, because Penn Jillette, Penn Jillette. Mm-hmm. Penn Jillette is an atheist, and he's also a libertarian, has been for a long time. I've actually met Penn Jillette. Really cool guy. I mean, back before I first started my Autopsy 87 channel, he had this series he did on his YouTube channel called Penn Talks, where it was just him holding a camera and just like riffing on things, about religion, about libertarianism and stuff. And I know he is no fan of Donald Trump. He has made that very clear. He made that clear in 2016. I believe he voted for Hillary. And he has voted for Joe Biden this time, but I came across this today, and I just had so many complaints with it. It's not a video. It's just it's a short bit here. All right. Penn This is what he says here, if anybody can't see it. Okay, so it's not over. There will be court fights, but Joe has won. I used to identify as a libertarian. I used to have opinions on government. I used to think I disagreed with Joe Biden on most everything, but I voted for him. I wanted the other guy fired, and I wanted Joe hired. And for me, the job description is now very simple. I need Joe to love all the Trump supporters. I don't care if Joe raises taxes. I don't care if Joe helps add stupid, counterproductive regulations. I don't care about anything except love and kindness. Now, and for Penn, this isn't a left-winger. This is a libertarian. I mean, I've seen videos across the decades of him supporting Harry Brown. He's a member of the Libertarian Party. He's voted Libertarian basically all of his adult life, at least going back into the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And been very vocal and actually given a lot of really good reasons for why he is a libertarian. But I think the thing that struck me here is it's not liking Trump. But when you're to the point where you can say just that last bit there, I don't care if Joe raises taxes. I don't care if Joe adds stupid, counterproductive regulations. I don't care about anything except love and kindness. It bothers me because it comes from this mindset of that is in any way, no matter how egregious you think that is for Trump to, say mean things or call Rosie O'Donnell a fat pig or like whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Those things, at the end of the day, people are going to be all right. Like, people are going to be all right if you're shit talking celebrities or you're saying mean things on Twitter or something like that.
But you're not stealing from them.
Yeah. And the thing that will actually hurt people is the raising taxes, is the stupid, counterproductive regulations. So if you don't care about anything except love and kindness, and it's interesting because that's kind of from the same standpoint of people that talk about like privilege and stuff like that, living in America and all that. Well, you want to talk about some real like first world privilege is the idea of like this guy was part of an administration that started 5 new wars. You want to talk about accept love and kindness. Well, what about the love and kindness for like the slave trade going on in Libya right now because of the Obama-Biden administration? What about like what's been going on in Syria or like the genocides going on in Yemen and all that stuff that Joe was a part of? Joe has supported all of those wars. But the fact
still
the
largest amount of drone strikes, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I know there's been some of the bombing increases that have happened under Trump's watch, but I mean it's still. I mean even that is you can't make that kind of an argument against Trump. And by the way, he's not even making like a he's the only argument he's making against Trump here, not just in this. The only argument he's making against Trump is basically Trump has said mean things.
Yeah, but the thing about it is like. This whole quote is summed up to me in the second sentence. You didn't really have to go any further than that. I used to identify as a libertarian, and that's it.
Yeah,
I used to.
But yeah, and that's exactly how I read it too. Yeah. Now if I see anything from this going forward where he's like, I no longer identify as a libertarian, to me that's how that reads.
Mm-hmm.
But
and actually the very end of this quote sums up that you're not a libertarian.
Yeah, that's certainly
because
not
if you would want,
take. Yeah.
Because if your issue is a First Amendment issue, for him being able to speak and call people fat and hurt people's but my feelings, versus theft, you're not a libertarian.
Yeah.
If you're gonna make that statement to me, I don't know if he was mad when he said it, but yeah, I mean it's words versus theft. If you're a true libertarian, taxes are theft to a certain degree. And if you're fine with the government coming in and taking people's money just because this person said something about this person, then that's not really a libertarian standpoint, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's an extremely...
Sounds like you're caught up in your feelings.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's what makes me think of... because there's a split in libertarianism where you refer to some of these people as being a right libertarian or especially left libertarian. And the left libertarians would be more like the people that... I guess a big distinction would be like the people that are like, let's say we like, even like me, prostitution should be legal. Just following basic property rights. You own your own body. There's nothing wrong with this is actually a Joe Jorgensen paraphrase. There's nothing wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with capitalism. There's nothing wrong with both of these things together as long as it's voluntary. That's basically a libertarian argument for it. Now, a left libertarian, and I don't know necessarily that I would throw Pendulette in this, but possibly, a left libertarian would agree with that, but also think that there's nothing morally questionable about somebody like being a prostitute. Well, that's kind of a different thing, whether it's something that you would morally condone. If I had a daughter, it's not something I would want for my daughter, obviously, but this thing like we need to legitimize sex work, it's like, well, our take on that, and I say our as in people who are not left libertarian, our take on that is like, well, no, we're not saying that this is a good or a moral thing. We're saying that you own your body, you should have a right to do with your body as you see fit. To say it's a moral thing is an entirely different situation altogether.
Mm-hmm. Which that also ties back into the drugs too.
Yeah,
I mean, you can make the same argument for drugs.
Yeah. It's like I'm certainly like when I say heroin should be legal, I'm certainly not saying like let's all go out and do heroin because that's
you're not advocating it.
Yeah, I'm advocating the freedom to be able to do
it, but not hey, go do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would be the first person to say again. I would just say like if I had a child and my even my child was a teenager or something, it's like I'm thinking about trying meth. I'd be like, you're fucking stupid. What are you doing? Why would you possibly want to? But Dad, you support legalization. It's like that's an entirely different ball game than encouraging people going out and doing it. So that's just kind of a take. And one of the things that is typical of people on the left, you heard a lot in the arguments, is it's a lot of emotion. Mm-hmm. A lot of like, this unsettles me. I feel a certain way about it. That's why you always hear things about, living wage and fair share. And you hear a lot of language like that comes out of that. So like this, I don't care about anything except love and kindness. I care way more about freedom than love and kindness. I think love and kindness are very important. I think they are very important. But at the end of the day, a person is much worse off if they have to pay a shitload of taxes. And a person is going to be much worse off if there are a lot of stupid, counterproductive regulations that stand between them and being free. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to go into this about the specifics of some of the things that Joe Biden is proposing. Because if you have this take that it's anything except love and kindness is something that I just don't care about, we have to look into some of the things that Joe Biden actually wants to do. And I'll say that none of this is even in the defense of Donald Trump. I don't have to make a defense of Donald Trump. To say if this is your take and that's what you wanted out of Joe Biden, all I have to do is show you, or at least make my case of why some of these things that are going to go on in a Joe Biden administration are going to hurt the average person way more than Trump saying mean things or anybody saying mean things. Because at the end of the day, that is not the most important thing you want out of someone who is heading up the organization that has a monopoly on force in the entire nation. So that, and I got to say, it kind of hurt, man. Because I've been a Pendulette fan. I still am. I'll still be a Pendulette fan. I'll hear the guy out. I think the guy's honest. I appreciate that very much.
And it's fair to. It's fair to speak your mind too.
Yeah.
If that's what you really think, have the balls to say it. But then also be prepared for the criticism.
Yeah.
Going against. To me, it's going against your principles.
Yeah.
Because you're caught in your feelings, and I'm sure there's other people that are calling him out on that, especially if you've been a libertarian for that long.
Yeah.
And for my understanding, libertarians, if they agree on anything, left, right, center, is taxes.
Yeah.
So
that should be a no-go. Taxes, yes. and as bad as taxes, taxes are horrible. Yeah.
But also for a libertarian,
my Rothbardian T-shirt, taxes are horrible. But like the regulation, like the ongoing perpetual wars, like dude, that shit matters. That shit matters it's so much more than whether or not the president is nice to people. I'm sorry, man. At the end of the day, it just does. The things that your average person has to deal with, like the deficit financing, like for future generations, kids that aren't even born yet are just having trillions of dollars just thrown on top of them. Like whole future generations of people in this country. Like, dude, that matters. It matters when somebody has to completely alter their lifestyle around the fact that the government steals a third of their income every year. Like
Well,
that
and it's
matters,
also
man.
yeah, and it's also a question of if you're a libertarian, which regime benefits gives you or at least leaves you with the more liberties than you had at least before they came in.
Hmm.
I'm not saying granted you anymore, but which one would take away less is pretty much what you're dealing with when you're dealing with the government in this country.
Yeah.
So they're not going to add any more most of the time, but they're going to take away. So which one are you better off with, Joe or Donald?
Yeah. And like I've said, man, I couldn't pull the lever for Trump this time. I did in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
I think Trump had his chance and let me down on too many things. But I've also said at the same time, all the things that I could think of that were big for me that Trump is bad on, Biden was worse on all of them. So Trump's spending, it was outrageous, the biggest spending in the history of the republic. Added a shitload to the debt, like all that's and all that being horrible. I'm like, we got to compare that to what is Biden gonna do? Well, Biden's proposed spending increases are even bigger because the thing is, it seems like every time we go along with another president, and they spend outrageously. So far this century, at least, it's been they always spend more than the last guy did. So I'm sad to say, like, we looked at Obama's spending and just like, holy shit. And then
Mm-hmm.
Trump came in and did what Trump did, and you're like, holy fuck. And that's the small government people. That's the conservative branch of the two huge spending parties. So he's spending like that. And then Joe Biden's proposed spending, we'll get into it. Some of the proposals for his spending are just, going to be through the roof, especially the first thing I'm seeing on this list. I pulled up a list just for topics and some of Joe Biden's positions. But the first thing I see here is coronavirus. Now, I don't know if you have seen this, but this is here. This is one of his COVID advisors for his new administration. So we know Biden has talked about when he had first announced Kamala as his VP, he was going around saying that a 3-month lockdown and mandatory mask mandate would be a route that he wanted to take. And a lot of people since then, because I haven't heard him mention it much since he had first came out with Kamala, before the election, obviously. I hadn't heard much from that, but I never heard anything that he backed away from it. And so when some people deny it, this comes out today. And I was listening to Peter Schiff's podcast earlier this morning, and he was talking about it. Basically, the take was that a U.S. lockdown of 4 to 6 weeks would be the federal government imposing on every citizen of the country basically house arrest for a month and a half, a month and a half, and then obviously the way that this would be funded is through even more horrible Federal Reserve policy, more stimulus packages, more spending, and this would be how the administration is starting off its first 4 years. So that's not a good sign at all in terms of spending and the debt. Also, in addition to this, Biden is supposed to announce that Janet Yellen is going to be his Secretary of Treasury. Janet Yellen is Obama's head of the Federal Reserve, who is very big. She's already came out with Ben Bernanke, supporting more lockdowns, more stimulus, more Fed printing money, and that would transition from the Federal Reserve to the Secretary of Treasury. Now, some people have said that some of the other people on Biden's list for Secretary of Treasury included Elizabeth Warren. Now, I don't know who's worse between Janet Yellen or Elizabeth Warren. I actually tend to think Elizabeth Warren is probably going to be worse than Janet Yellen. But basically, don't look forward to interest rates rising ever. Don't look forward to having any sort of spending under control. Look forward to more deficit financing, and like we talked about, like it looks like the Republicans are going to hang on to the Senate. The only thing, like I've said before, the only thing Republicans are really good at is opposing Democrats. But then again, Republicans have signed off on these big spending bills under Trump, but I think they'll be a bit more hesitant under a Biden. So that's something to
Mm-hmm.
hope for. But they're obviously, like, the Republicans right now are wanting to do another like 1.8 billion stimulus package. So we'll see. But if you lock down the entire country for a month and a half, it's very expensive. It's going to cost a lot of money to do that.
Well, and it's one of those things too. You know, you spend other people's money a lot quicker than you spend your own. So
Yeah.
tend to be a little bit more frugal with your money. So
Yeah. I think we had one more on that. Yeah. There you go. A plan to pay for a national lockdown lasting up to 6 weeks. And folks, you're not going to do that with taxes. You're not even close to that. Right now, it's something like 60 cents for every dollar our government's spending doesn't even come from taxes. So even the majority, 60 cents out of every dollar, comes from basically the Federal Reserve printing it up. So there you go. That's how they're going to plan to pay for it. We don't pay for it. Your great grandchildren just get floated down the bill. And when they can't pay for it, they're going to have to float it down to somebody else. So that giant fucking can just keeps getting kicked down the road. But eventually the can gets too big to kick and you run out of road.
mm-hmm.
And we're already well over, I think we're at like 27.5 trillion right now in national debt. So that's not looking good in terms of coronavirus. Now, some of the stuff has come out about they have this new, I don't know if they're calling it a vaccine, the Pfizer thing. I don't know if they're actually promoting it as a vaccine. You know, you'll see what happens with that. But still, if you're talking about this kind of a lockdown, and another thing for these lockdowns, as you're seeing even in Europe right now, you know, a lot of people were saying that America needed to do what Europe did, and we need to lock down. Well, Europe's having a second wave right now, and the problem is with the lockdown is it doesn't eradicate the virus.
No.
So, the entire point of all of us locking down, costing the nation, you know, trillions on top of trillions of dollars to lock down for something that you're going to have to face again in a matter of months, which is what Europe's going through right now. In fact, I was reading earlier that Spain has actually surpassed America in terms of COVID deaths per capita. Now, feel free to look that up. I haven't had enough time to sit there and like dig real into it, like far into it, to make sure all the numbers from all the different accounts add up. But they're definitely, the cases are on the rise. And of course, the cases are on the rise here in the States as well. I know Texas has hit 1 million COVID cases a couple of days ago. Then, like, immediately the next day, California hit 1 million cases. The good news is the survivability is really high. Now, obviously, this thing can be really devastating for certain groups of people, but this is one of the things that I've been saying since March, that basically the attention needs to be given to the people who are, people that they say have more like comorbidities, people that have health issues, people that are elderly. That's where the focus needs to be. This idea that we need to shut the entire country down for a month and a half, can't leave, is just preposterous. And if you want to talk about true authoritarianism, I can't imagine where anybody would even pretend to say they have some sort of constitutional grounding for the President of the United States to force 320 million people to stay in their house for a month and a half.
Yeah. Just the enforcement on that is ridiculous.
Yeah. And even then, you not only can you not do it, you know, they have this sort of Keynesian concept of like, well, everybody still gets money, so everybody can still pay for stuff. But the thing is, this is the thing we did this last time, where if you're an essential worker, obviously you can't stay home. Somebody has to man the grocery stores. Like, somebody has to work at the hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got to have like the cops out or whatever. So you can't even lock them down. So what happens? You lock everybody else down, but these people that have to go out and work, absolutely have to go out and work to keep the lights on in the country, they have to come back home sometime. Now, what if they have it? You completely just did away with the point of a fucking lockdown. The thing that seems to me to make the most sense is you just have to put that focus on people who are elderly or who have, major illnesses or something. But this idea that everybody else, like, if you're in your 20s, your average person in their 20s, there's no fucking reason these people should be forced to, like, stay home.
Yeah, I think it's like a 99 point something percent chance of
Survival rate, yeah.
survival rate. Yeah.
This
That was one of
thing,
the things that they were talking. I know Trump was talking about during the debates was the survivability rate of younger people compared to old,
mhm,
and yeah, it's just the majority of it's just being careful.
yeah.
But that to me is also kind of flexing the old government muscle a little
Hmm.
bit there too.
Yeah.
So
Well, what's crazy is the people who get on board with it. I mean, I was hearing, I forgot who it was. It was one of these governors or mayors or something that apparently, I haven't seen the clip, but apparently they were on Tucker Carlson sometime, maybe in the past few months or something. And Tucker Carlson had asked him that same question: "Is where do you get constitutional authority to to do any of this?" And at one point, it was the governor or the mayor or whatever. Eventually, after getting pressed a lot, said something like, "That's above my pay grade." No, that is your pay grade. If you're the governor or the mayor, an elected official, it matters if you're working within the bounds of the goddamn Constitution. You swore an oath to the Constitution to
mhm.
follow the rules that you're bound by. And it's just like, well, I mean, but again, how many people asked for it? And even the ones that did, was it the mainstream? The mainstream wasn't asking for it. The mainstream
Mhm.
doesn't look at this as any sort of like government overreach, as far as I can tell. They look at it as just like, oh, good, somebody's trying to help us out. And it's like, my God, man, if that's the mentality of the people, then how bad can this get?
I mean, come on now. It was just a book that was written by a bunch of old racist white men. So
Yeah.
it's, I mean, if you get down to the majority of, people inside of inner cities that's what they're hearing. So why would I enforce? There's no pressure from the people in the city or anywhere. I mean, yeah, there are groups and stuff like that, but there's no big pressure on them to force the politicians to abide by the Constitution.
Right.
So,
That,
it's not just the mainstream media, which the mainstream media is feeding all that crap, but
yeah.
it's
Well,
there's no push. It's
yeah.
like, hey, I've got this going on Twitter right now, man. I don't have time to
Yeah. Yeah.
force a politician or to
But,
say this or say that or go picket or protest.
yeah, I
No.
understand that. I understand that. I guess just to me, it's kind of like it's unsettling to see people become so complacent with something that was unthinkable even a year ago. I mean, even your average person even a year ago is like, well, if you'd have told them this, it's like, oh, by the way, like the government's actually going to be having a national conversation of whether or not you're going to be locked in your fucking house for a month and a half. It's like, what do you mean I am? It's like, oh, not you. Everybody in the country is going to be locked in their house for a month and a half. That's some shit that you could have only ever, Orwell would have wrote about or something. As much of a cliche as that sounds, like that's really something that is like, who the fuck would have thought that would be a conversation that was seriously being had right now? And by the way, they've done it. They've already done it for months now. A lot of these states never even halfway open back up, or at least certain cities in certain states.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole thing is bizarre to me too. And it's bizarre to me that you have a situation like that, but then again, you have these situations where like people can go and protest. Cops are told to stand down when they're burning down buildings. Like it's like, well, most of these protests were peaceful. Okay, whatever. That's whether it was the slight majority of them or not. It still matters when cities are being like fucking burnt down or halfway destroyed. That matters. But also, like, well, what about all this? We got to fucking social distance. But then they'll come out and be like, well, wait a minute. Now you have a right to go out and protest. It's like, really? But now you're saying we don't have a right to leave our fucking house to go to work? Have you
Yeah.
heard some of the shit like Cuomo and de Blasio have been telling like the Jews in New York? Have you heard any of that stuff?
No.
Like Andrew Cuomo is saying like, well, if they don't abide by the rules, we're going to shut the synagogues down. It's like, what great optics you have going here, Andrew Cuomo. And like the Jews are pissed. And we're talking about like straight up like Orthodox,
Mm-hmm.
These hardcore Orthodox Jews are just like, fuck this. What is that? And then de Blasio and Cuomo begging like the millionaires to move back to New York because they need the tax dollars. I say, fuck
Mm-hmm.
them. It's
Yeah.
like a mass exodus leaving out of
Well,
there.
the thing
Too. I
about
don't
it is
blame
the
them.
people keep voting them in. it's all the same scumbags get voted in time after time.
Yeah.
You know, they're not changing anything. Nobody will vote these people out.
Yeah.
And then where are all these death rates coming from?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So another thing for Biden here, moving out of coronavirus, jobs and money. The first thing it says on here is raising the minimum wage and invest in green energy. I think we talked a little bit about the minimum wage on the last episode we did. But yeah, Biden is on board now with a $15 an hour minimum wage and to invest in green energy. Okay, when you say invest in green energy from a Democrat president, I just hear a lot of fucking money. I see here, okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, he wants to spend $2 trillion to invest in green energy. So that's just for a new energy plan. There's also $400 billion pledged to use federal dollars to buy American goods, alongside a wider commitment to enforce Buy American laws for a new transport project. Mr. Biden was previously criticized for backing NAFTA, which critics say shipped jobs overseas. Okay, so that's a shitload of spending going into green energy. Among the proposals are an additional $200 in Social Security payments per month, getting rid of the Trump tax cuts, which is another thing we can talk about, and $10,000 of student loan forgiveness for federal loans. So you're getting the Diet Bernie plan here. You're getting the, we're not canceling student debt. We're going to knock $10,000 off of it. So where should we start here? I could go into a whole thing on why Social Security is bullshit. We could do the Trump tax cuts, or we could do the student loan forgiveness. Which one of those would you like to handle first?
Let's go with the student loan situation.
Yeah, I think Social Security could end up being its own. That'll end up being its own podcast or something probably. Okay, so the student loan forgiveness for federal loans. So that's $10,000. Now again, you got to ask where does the money come from out of that? Another thing, obviously, being the reason I think they're doing this is to throw a bone to the progressives, where they're like, "Hey, you got $200,000 in student loan debt. We're gonna knock off 10 of that." What did Trump?
Hell yeah! Get back to basket weaving.
So $10,000 of student loan forgiveness for federal loans. So just a real quick bit here for some of the people that watch this that might not know. I might end up doing a thing on college. I do have a video, by the way, about to come out. I've had it uploaded for a couple of weeks now, but it's just been because of the election I haven't made it public. But I do have one coming out about healthcare, about free market healthcare, and how to fix a lot of the problems right now that won't actually cost a dime to fix, but we can drastically change the outrageous costs of healthcare in America. But I might end up doing another one eventually for student loans. But just really quick here, the problem with student loans, I know as you know, is the government guarantees the loans. Mm-hmm. So when the government guarantees the loans, then the banks don't have to worry about whether or not it's a good idea to give some 18-year-old with no job history, no collateral, no money, no experience, nothing but ambition. If the government didn't guarantee the loans, when that 18-year-old with all of those characteristics walked into the bank and wanted $150,000, $200,000 in a loan, a bank teller who's not guaranteed the loan would laugh their ass off and be like, "Well, no, you don't have any. Why the fuck would I ever do that?" But since the government guarantees the loan, the bank's going to get paid regardless. The administration that goes on in colleges is going through the fucking roof, because colleges can basically do whatever the fuck they want because they're just raking in the cash. That's this whole part of the system, and this is something that a lot of the progressives are right about, but their solution is so abhorrently wrong. Where they talk about the big banks are against us and stuff. Well, it's like, yeah, they are, but funny enough, when you start with the big banks, it's always Citibank or fucking J.P. Morgan or something like that, and you always hear about those things, but you never hear about the Fed. You never hear about the fact that the Federal Reserve prints the money, gives it to the banks at zero interest, and the banks can turn around and charge you outrageous interest rates for those same loans they didn't have to pay a dime for. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's corruption in the system. That's not a fault of capitalism. That's the fault of the government having a cartel in the banking industry. That's only there because of the government. So the government guaranteeing the loans. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna touch on the fact that There's so much wrong with this because really and truly, they don't. By the way this system is set up, they don't care about the person, these young people that are going in here and they're pretending like they do by saying, hey, we're going to knock this money off, or hey, we're going to try to give it to you for free. First of all, there's nothing for free. But the way the student loans are set up, it's going against the young people because that's one thing about student loans don't go anywhere. Like, that's one of the things that doesn't disappear after 7 years,
Yeah.
because it's federally, it just doesn't disappear.
And my understanding is even like bankruptcy doesn't clear
Mm-hmm.
student loans.
Yeah.
So you could rack
Yeah.
up just ungodly amounts. I was actually hearing, I was listening to an episode of Joe Rogan this morning. He had Dave Smith on, libertarian guy. Dave Smith's been on there like a half a dozen times. But Joe Rogan had mentioned something about, like, they actually, even if you're into Social Security and you have student loans, they'll garnish some of your Social Security to
Mm-hmm.
to get
Oh,
some
yeah.
of that money back for student loans.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm,
And then when you give them a $200,000 student loan to take a basket weaving class, I mean, like, what are you going to school for, and why are you trying to go to this school to get that? Is it something that you could get in a trade school for cheaper, or is college?
Yeah.
Do you really even need college for it? But it's
Yeah.
like everybody has to go to college, has to get into this system, and then yeah, the system is broke when it comes to college, but it's broke because you're going to college for shit you don't need to be going to college for
Yeah.
the
Well,
majority of the time.
and part of that
Why is the
also, yeah, I was just going to say part of that also too is a failure on half of parents and teachers all across the country. Because I know we were told this growing up by everybody said this, like, you don't go to college, you'll never amount to anything. You can't do anything without a college degree. And then a lot of people, like, right out of high school, feel like they have to go. They'll go in, and a lot of those people, you're talking about people even with hundreds of thousands of dollars in college debt, oftentimes don't even graduate, don't even come out with a degree at all.
Mm-hmm.
So you go in there and you've wasted all this time. It's fair to say plenty of them just party their way through college. But either way, whatever they do there, if you're coming out with a house note in debt and not even a degree to show for it, let alone coming out with a degree that doesn't make you nothing compared to what your debt is,
Mm-hmm.
then the whole thing was worthless. And there's no other way around that. Like those parents and teachers and administrators throughout high schools and middle schools all throughout America telling you need to go, you have to go, you have to go, you have to go. I would say no, don't go unless you have a good reason to go, unless you know what you're going to do. And I would say especially if you can cash flow your college. That's a much better thing than taking out
Mm-hmm.
loans. And this idea that somebody is supposed to know what they want to do for their entire life by the time they're 15 is just ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane. Think how stupid you were at 15. You have no fucking clue. And then you're going to go over there and, like, your parents will co-sign for what is essentially a house note.
Well, hell, your frontal lobe hasn't even fully formed at 15.
Yeah, well, your frontal lobe hasn't even fully deformed, I think, until you're 25.
Yeah.
So, so basically, almost nobody making those decisions even has a fully functional brain yet. When you think about it,
And the majority of people, like you say, they end up either in a different field or not finishing college, but some of them do finish college and never are successful in it because they didn't do the research of how many jobs are actually available in the field that they're going to college for.
and how much it makes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
So,
I mean, you you spend $200,000 over 5 years to be, you know, I mean, something that you're not going to make $200,000 for the first 5 years.
Yeah.
Like, and then you got to live, so it's going to take you 25 years to pay that off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Between trying to get a house and everything like that, and then if you go bad on that debt, it hurts your credit at a very young age.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to play catch up on your credit while trying to pay off the government and the banks. So
yeah, this is one of the first times that I actually really caught a grasp of how fucked that entire situation is when somebody put it into the terms that you're starting out life with a house note and no house to show for it. Mm-hmm. Like, you didn't even get the house. I can't imagine, like, having to, like, I'm just thinking, like, the mortgage I have to pay for my house right now, having to pay that but still not even having a house. Like, and the fact that some of these people will graduate without even getting the degree let alone
Mhm.
be in a degree that's worthless, or let alone have a degree that is like, well, it still makes good money, but not near enough to pay off the debt. Imagine just going through all that shit, and then by the
Mhm.
time you're done, you don't even have any more of a leg to stand on than you did before. You have nothing to show for it. But again, a
But
lot of people get pissy about that, but that's not. And they try to blame. It's the system's fault. That's why a lot of these people think it's outrageous that I have this amount of debt. This debt needs to be forgiven. It doesn't need to be forgiven. You did
no.
sign up for that debt. You voluntarily signed up for that debt, and you went. What we're trying to say is it's a dumb system, and it's the government's fault that the system's that way.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly the point. What the hell is the government doing involved in any of this anyway?
Yeah, it didn't used to
You
be,
know.
and it used to be
Now.
incredibly affordable.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when the government gets its grubby hands in on anything, it gets worse.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but yeah, I don't see what the point in the government trying to give out free college, because the government doesn't make money.
yeah.
Now they literally do make money. They make paper money, but it's not backed by
That's
anything.
that's the
But
that's the only way in which the government makes money, is the
yes.
literal creation of it. But the government is this is the Rothbardian take. The government has a parasitical relationship to the economy. It
Mhm.
subsists off the economy. It doesn't create for the economy. It takes from the people who create for the economy. Whatever it doesn't matter. You ain't got to be a libertarian or an ANCAP to even come to that conclusion. That's just what the government is. Now, even if you think there's plenty of people who would argue, well, it needs to because we need the fucking roads or whatever the fuck. It still is a parasitical organization, and that it subsists off of the productivity of the market.
But see, there are also different levels, as we were talking about earlier, different levels that you can go about of bad ideas and bad things to think about. I could, you know, I could see more of a justification for the government being involved in building roads than I can them trying to alleviate billions of dollars worth of student debts that people signed on for.
Yeah.
Why in the hell are you involved in? I mean, you know what I mean? Like we were talking about with the pendulette thing. There's so many different things that have different levels of bad idea
Mm-hmm.
that the government shouldn't be involved
Oh
in,
yeah,
or this,
yeah.
that, and the other. But I could see roads over your dumbass decision to go be a basket weaver at Yale. Why are you
Yeah.
at Yale going to school for basket weaving or some type of arts class?
Yeah.
You know, because it makes no sense. And then why the government's involved in it, it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
I mean, you can make roads if you want to, but
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I have nothing to do with.
yeah, I understand that take completely. There's levels of things like if you're talking about like what do we do with the country right now, like the first thing you don't do, and I see a lot of libertarians kind of fall into this. Some of the things with immigration, some of the things with police. A lot of libertarians, don't like the police because the police are the muscle of the state. But the thing is, if we're starting from like the chopping block, that's not the best place to start. There's all these things that should be easy pickings that you could get to your average person to even get on board with. The conversation about like police and like the military and stuff, that's a conversation you got to have like much further down the line. Because if I can't get somebody on my side to say like, hey, we shouldn't subsidize fucking college or something.
That's
It's
exactly
yeah,
right.
yeah. So like, if I can't get that person to do that, I'm not going to be able to explain to them why we don't need the post office, let alone that we don't need like the police or military. Like I said, you can
Yeah,
have those conversations, but you got to work your way like through a long list of things. If you can't get people on board with the simple shit, you're never going to get them on board with this over here. So yeah,
exactly.
that's a totally valid take. Next on here is race, criminal justice reform, and grants for minority communities. Pull this up. This ought to be good.
Criminal justice reform from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris?
Yeah, I ain't buying
Are
it
we
either.
sure?
Yeah, I ain't buying it either. Like the two of it's so incredible that especially in this time in America that the two of them ended up coming out on the top of the Dem ticket. Like the two like the tougher on crime left wingers. And I say left wingers like Joe Biden is like very very slightly like left of center. I mean, he's a corporatist. He has all these things like he panders with, but like Joe's not like some far left guy. No, I mean Joe's. I think it's really just like an establishment thing. I
Oh,
mean,
come on, man.
if you voted, yeah, come on, man. If you voted for Joe Biden, you voted along with like George Bush and Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, yeah.
that's what you got. I mean, Susan Rice, like everybody from the Clinton, Bush, Obama era, That's what you voted for here. In the wake of the race protests that have gripped the U.S. this year, he said he believes that racism exists in the U.S. and must be dealt with through broad economic and social programs to support minorities. A pillar of his Build Back program is to create business support for minorities through a $30 billion investment fund. I guess the devil's in the details on that.
Let's just throw money at it.
Yeah, because that works. That really is. I mean, we have
welfare has helped so much with the family. To, all these different the housing divisions when you made the projects.
Yeah,
that wasn't there before all this stuff happened.
That's
come on, man.
We could go off on that, but I think kind of just to sum up how government works in the first place, it's almost everything it does to try to help makes things worse.
Absolutely,
it's really just it's so bad. I mean, I shared this one time on Twitter. It was like every time the government tries to thinks it's helping, and it was basically the guy from Ghostbusters 2, the guy with the paintings. Everything you are doing is bad. I want you to know this. It's like it really is what it is. Like they fuck everything up. They throw so much gas on so many fires, and look, some of it's not intentional. I think some of it probably is to get different things pushed through in the long run, but a lot of it's not intentional. It's really like incompetence and unintended consequences. Thomas Sowell is great on pointing some of this stuff out because you look at some of the stuff on the surface, you're like, hey, dude, a fucking $15 minimum wage, like this would be so great for people that are struggling to make it. It's like, well, it won't be whenever they get fired because the true minimum wage is zero. And now if their labor is unaffordable, they're going to be unemployed. Rent control is the same thing. It sounds great to let's keep prices down so people can live in these houses. Then you get all the other side effects where rent control actually makes housing more expensive. Because now there's no incentive to upkeep or build new low-income housing. Now it's the only thing if we're going to build housing, we're going to build it for the fucking rich who are exempt from rent control laws.
Or actually, you could get into the conversation too, as we were having earlier, about the schooling and giving out big loans.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac under, was that Obama, I believe, wasn't it?
Bush. I thought it was Bush.
Was it Bush? It was either Bush or Obama. It might have been early Obama. I can't remember. But it was the same concept, regardless which one it was. And they were the same person. One was, But anyway, that's what they did there. They gave a lot of people that didn't have the credit score or anything like that. Mm-hmm. They gave them those loans on those big $200,000 houses. And it's the same thing. They just lost a house and now their credit's gone. Any little bit of credit they had.
That was Bush era policies. That's one of the big things that led to the housing bubble and that burst in 2008. It was this idea that it's again trying to help people. Perfect example. Really glad you brought that up. Perfect example of how we're trying to help people. We want people to have the American dream of owning a home. So therefore, you're heavily basically instructed. I don't know what the laws were that were actually passed to force this on the businesses or the loan companies. But basically now you're going to have to start giving loans to people who you would otherwise not because their credit score is so low. So now they start coming up with these other government programs to get people with sub 500 credit scores. Well, we want them to be able to own a home too because it's just not fair, goddammit. Well, it turns out those people tend to default on their loans at crazy rates because hence the bad credit score. Hence the market coming up with this thing right here to say, where do these people fall? What's the risk level? So we're going to shove that fucking aside and say, no, it's the American dream to have a fucking house. And now they're even going straight up saying housing is a human right. So you're going to get all that shit out of there, too.
Or also, do you make enough money monthly to pay the note on that house? I mean, it only makes sense. But it also comes back and it's one of those little, I like to use analogies and stuff like that. Just like off Jurassic Park, some of the worst things in history have been done with the best of intentions.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying on this side, that these people don't legitimately care. I think that there are a lot of people that actually care. Yeah. I just think that they're going about it, and history proves they're going about it the exact wrong way. And it's just, to me, it's more of the same. It's, this looks good.
It's just, it's one of these things, if you paid attention enough, and especially if you have this kind of understanding like we have of like we already don't trust the government, and really it's for a good reason, but we also understand like the moral implications of like how these things work, why the market, just generally speaking, is just so much better equipped to handle these situations. You know, if you really want people to be helped out, you want, you know, and you want higher wages, for instance, then you want a stronger market. That's what drives wages up, is a more productive private sector. But anyways, here on criminal justice, he has moved far from his much criticized tough on crime position. In the 1990s, Mr. Biden has now proposed policies to reduce incarceration, address race, gender, and income-based disparities in the justice system, and rehabilitate released prisoners. He would now create a $20 billion grant program to incentivize states to invest in incarceration reduction efforts, eliminate mandatory minimum sentences, decriminalize marijuana and expunge prior cannabis convictions, and end the death penalty. I have seen something today, actually, that says they have released a plan for criminal justice reform, and it does not, it includes some of this stuff, but does not even touch the marijuana and expunging prior cannabis convictions. So at least from what's listed now, that seems to be out. Mandatory minimum sentences, like, look, could it be that he's going to do these things? It's possible, but he's had the opportunity before and has done the exact opposite. I mean, the exact opposite. Well, that crime bill was so bad because it was the 3 strikes, you're out. So a lot of people spend a lot of fucking time in prison because of the exact opposite of what Biden is saying he wants to do here. However, he has rejected calls to defund police, saying resources should instead be tied to maintaining standards. He argues that some funding for police should be redirected to social services like mental health, and calls for $300 million investment in a community police program. Well, that's not going to do anything. And by the way, redirecting funding from the police to other places is really just a roundabout way of saying defund, at least to an extent, the police. I've done a video on that too, about some of these arguments about defund the police, what they actually mean by defund the police. But I'm still trying to understand this concept, because, you know, Joe Biden had mentioned in that town hall they did instead of the second debate, remember? Mm-hmm. Joe Biden had talked about at one point, like, the cop should have shot the guy in the leg, that sort of thing. Like, I have to wonder if the guy actually believes this, or if this is just somebody who doesn't know fuck about shit trying to pretend like they do. Because the whole thing, like, cops shoot the smallest part of the body that's constantly moving. Like, they'll shoot him in the fucking shin. Like, they have this idea, like, you watch a bunch of movies, and, like, the cops are so good, like, even SWAT, you know, they can shoot a pistol out of somebody's hand from, like, you know, fucking, like, half a mile away or something. So, no, there's that, and then there's the real world. And the real world is you shoot center mass because you're trying to put down a threat.
Well, at the point that a cop could legally shoot somebody,
yeah,
it's pretty much a done deal anyway. Why take the chance of shooting them in the leg? Because you have to have some proof of some type of bodily harm to yourself or somebody else.
Yeah,
even for police officers.
Yeah, well, so and also, as you know, because you carry, as I do, this is one of the things that we're taught is, you're responsible for every bullet. Mm-hmm. So cop goes around and starts trying to shoot somebody in the leg, and those bullets don't hit. Those bullets go somewhere. Mm-hmm. Now, you can point to a lot of things with cops getting, too rambunctious or too crazy and not paying enough attention to where their bullets are going when they do miss in a normal situation. But at least if you're aiming center mass, you got a much easier target to hit than feet and legs that are doing this when somebody's fucking running around and shifting. So the idea
you also do your best, but as you were just saying, you see how the cops miss. Imagine if they were shooting for their legs.
Yeah. Like, you got to shoot his feet as he runs.
Yeah. No.
Because we got to be like non-lethal. And look, hey man, like I'm not like in love with the idea that, like, in order for the cops to put these people down, a lot of times they have to kill them. But at the same time, I'm not so dense that I can't at least understand. It's like, okay, well, the guy that was running at him with a knife, that the cop told him to put the knife down like 12 times. And yeah, the guy got shot. It's like, okay, pick and choose your battles here. Like, you'll get me on your side if you show me, like, the cop fucking just stood over the guy and just put like 9 rounds in the guy's back. I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I've seen
Or
plenty
so,
of. We've seen videos of.
oh yeah,
Of cops doing things where you're just like, dude, no, go on. And it also turns out that a lot of the times those cops do get fired and go to prison, which they should. But it's god damn, dude, you got to pick and choose the arguments you want to present, because it's really hard to get me on your side when they come up with some of the shit that they do. Let's move through a bit more here. Climate change, we've kind of covered that. Wants to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. Though he does not embrace the Green New Deal, a climate and jobs package put forward by his left wing of his party, he's proposing a $1.7 trillion federal investment in green technologies and research. We kind of covered that. Wanting the U.S. to reach net zero emissions by 2050. China and India, the 2 other biggest carbon emitters, have yet to join the pledge. And also, this is another one of these things that's kind of misleading. You do hear this a bit more often now. That China, it's kind of like us, China, and India. Well, hold on. It's almost like saying like America has the number 1 military, right? Mm-hmm. Well, who's number 2? What is it? Is it China, right? China is number 2. Number 3 would be like Russia, probably. Yep. Number 4 is North Korea. So when you look at these things on a list, you're like, wow, North Korea is number 4. Here's the thing. After number 1, it drops off a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. And even then, when you get to number 2, the gap between number 2 and 3 is really fucking big. And by the time you get to number 4, it is a massive gap. So it's a little bit misleading to say China, India, and the United States are the top polluters. There's a massive gap between the emissions that come out of the United States and China and India. I would love to actually see the numbers on it, but looking at the graphs I've seen, it's about half. Like really not close in terms of overall like greenhouse gases that come out. But yeah, we talked about this earlier. Like basically $2 trillion in green spending. Actually, I wonder if this is in addition to that. So in the beginning, it was jobs and money. He wanted to spend $2 trillion investment in green energy to boost green manufacturing jobs, and this is saying I guess on top of that, he's proposing another $1.7 trillion for green technology research.
Yeah, from my understanding from the debates, I think the third debate, that's one of the things Trump said was, I think he was proposing like $3.7 trillion when he was telling Joe, tell him about the $3.7 trillion that all this is going to cost after you're talking about putting the oil industry.
Okay, yeah.
So,
yeah, there you go, right there. Yeah. So, yeah, because I was about to say that 1.7 number was a different number. So, yeah, that's $3.7 trillion going into green energy. That's a lot of fucking money. Let's try to move through some more of these here. Foreign policy. Dude, we know what Joe Biden's foreign policy is going to be. Mr. Biden wrote that as president, he would focus on national issues first. I would say that's good, but I see what the national issues are going to be and the amount of spending. Talk about with China and with NATO, basically saying he disagrees with Trump. You're going to get more wars, dude. You're going to get more. If Biden serves one term, which you probably will, I would be absolutely amazed if Biden ended a war. I would give him mad respect. I'd give him mad props. I don't see that happening. Biden has supported every fucking war this century so far. So,
man, I really wish and hope that Joe Biden ends his first term.
Yeah.
Because it's a big question mark if that doesn't happen.
But I see him or Kamala, either one. I only see one term coming out of this. And then again, I say that, but who fucking knows what Republicans will put up? You know, they run fucking Mark Rubio or something. It's like, okay, all right, we're
come
good.
on out here, Rick Santorum.
Yeah, Rick Santorum disagreeing with Joe Biden on how China needs to be nuked or something like that.
We need to nuke all their nuclear facilities.
Under healthcare, he wants to expand Obamacare. Of course, he's been very vocal about that. That's another thing in my healthcare video that's going to come out.
It's going to be Biden care.
Yeah. Mr. Biden says he will expand the public health insurance scheme passed when he was President Barack Obama's deputy. They implement the plan to ensure an estimated 97% of Americans. Yes, I mean, that was basically the promise under Obamacare, that more Americans would be insured. Of course, they were. But then, of course, they had plans that were unaffordable with deductibles that were outrageous, premiums rising rapidly, insurance providers dropping out of the market because of intense regulation and taxes. As the whole thing was an absolute clusterfuck. And obviously, I don't see it here, but Biden will be wanting to get the individual mandate put back that Trump did away with an executive order. So, you would go back to being fined for not buying a private product from an insurance company. Land of the free. The Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, a nonpartisan group, estimates that the total Biden plan would cost $2.25 trillion over 10 years.
And see, this is where we get into another long conversation when we start talking about healthcare.
Yeah.
Because there's so much you can talk about healthcare. Is it a right? Is healthcare right?
Are you asking?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Well, healthcare, that would be a positive right, because that would mean you actually have the right, because it's care. So you don't have a right to be cared for by somebody else under any reasonable or rational understanding of property rights. You just don't have that right. You would have the right to access care if someone's willing to care for you, but no, you wouldn't. That concept it doesn't make any sense in terms of like neutral rights, in terms of positive rights. But once you start getting to the point where you have a right to demand care from somebody, then you start getting into a lot of slippery ground here, where now you have a right to demand things from people, which just violates my understanding of property rights. I'll try to rush through these real quick here. Immigration, obviously, undo Trump's policies. We'll do healthcare someday. There's a lot, like Social Security, like you said, like Jesus. There's a lot there. Immigration, undo Trump's policies. First 100 days in office. Biden promises to reverse Trump's policies that separate parents from their children at the U.S.-Mexican border. By the way,
Wasn't that Obama's policy that was just carried on? Who built the cages, Joe?
Who built the cages, Joe? Why do you like brown kids in cages, Joe? Why did you do it, you sick bastard? So they did. And, of course, this came out and was very underreported, that those cages were built by the Obama administration. Obama and Biden together deported something like 3.5 million illegals. So this idea that they're the camp to like undo that is just ridiculous. If he goes a completely different route, then again, his entire half a fucking century in politics, sure, if he goes a completely different route. But we know what he's done before. Rescind limits on the number of applicants for asylum, in the ban on travel from several majority Muslim countries. Also promises protect the Dreamers, as well as ensure they are eligible for federal student aid. Okay, so that's kind of like run-of-the-mill Democrat. Nothing like heavy there, but whatever. It's what you would expect. It's basically what Hillary ran on.
But it's not 1990s Democrat stance on immigration.
No, it's more like 2015. Yeah. No, in 1990s Democrats.
I'm talking like Bill Clinton.
Yeah,
his actual standpoint on immigration was like the same as Trump's, from my understanding.
That's what I tell people. 1990s Democrat immigration policy is basically Trump's policy. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of that same shit about building a wall, like Clinton talked about that, Bush talked about that. All this kind of thing is like, we're a nation of laws, we got to have borders, all that. That's been like the norm for a long time. Now, obviously, Trump added Trump's rhetoric and style to it, which obviously pissed a lot of these people off. But like that concept has been there.
Actually, from my understanding, Junior Senator Barack Obama's statements about immigration were pretty similar as well.
We will. That'll be another thing we could talk about. We could make an episode out of each of these. Because I have shitloads of footage of every Democrat everybody has ever heard of that has said anything about Donald Trump's proposed policy, saying almost the exact same thing, or some variant of it, through some point in their career. Last one here is education. Universal preschool, expand free college. In a noticeable shift to the left, he has endorsed several big pieces of education policy that have become popular within the party: student loan debt forgiveness, expansion of tuition-free colleges, and universal preschool access. These would be paid using money gained back from withdrawing the Trump-era tax cuts. So we talked about education a bit earlier. I do want to touch on this thing about withdrawing the Trump-era tax cuts. I've said this a million times. Biden says he's not going to raise taxes on anybody making under $400,000 a year. So nobody would have their taxes raised if they make less than $400,000 a year. That is twice in this article he's talked about withdrawing from the Trump-era tax cuts. Okay, the Trump-era tax cuts benefited roughly 63 to 65% of Americans. So if you get rid of the Trump tax cuts, your taxes are going to go up, which is a no-brainer. Anybody with a brain or common sense knew this, saw that coming. So, but he's saying he's going to pay for some of this stuff whenever he gets rid of the Trump tax cuts, which is just bunk. I'm going to save this. I'm going to save this article.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm looking up this universal preschool. That's the first I've heard of that.
Oh, really? No, that's throughout the primaries they were all talking about that. Universal preschool. The thing is, this is another one of these weird things where if you're on board with the government subsidizing, elementary and middle school and high school, it does get silly to argue that, well, yeah, but preschool, we're not fucking doing that. That would just be one more thing, but that's kind of my point, because I am against taxpayer-funded public education. I'm not against public education. I'm not against public education in the sense of people having access to it. I definitely want it cheap. I want it available. I want it way better than what the government's giving us, because you're basically not even getting an education. You're graduating high school with no skills to offer an employer. They can't make you more than $7 an hour for most of these people. So you're not actually learning anything useful in school anyways. Most of it is a big waste of time. There's good books to read on that. Molyneux has some good stuff. Rothbard has some good stuff. I'm going to start Ron Paul's book on education. Ron Paul's made his own homeschool curriculum. But, adding preschool to it would be basically adding, one more year of what's already taxpayer-funded.
Yeah, I think you can do either 1 or 2 years of preschool. I think there might even be an early preschool, too.
I'm thinking kindergarten is part of public school, and that's like 4-year-olds. And I know when I was in preschool, I was 3. So that would be like 1, maybe 2 years more.
Yeah, but I think 2-year-olds can go to preschool, too. I could be wrong.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So basically at that point, you would be adding just more to the list, which is also the groundwork they're going to use in the future to add college to the list as well.
But see, that's also, you can compare that to one of the things that Trump was pushing for, which was more school choice, which really, really, really affects inner city children.
Yeah.
To get out of those horrible inner city schools and get away from the garbage that goes on in some of the major cities in our country. Again,
because it's like a varying degree of like, okay, well, if we are going to have like public schools, taxpayer funded public schools, there at least needs to be way more fucking options and way more competition to get better results in a public school system. So yeah, I mean the school choice thing, again, it's another one of these. It's like it's a no brainer. Like, what exactly is the good argument against this? Some of the arguments were like, well, it would some of that money would go to like private schools and it would strip the necessary funding needed from the public schools. But it's like, but at the same time, if you're doing a good job and people like the result they're getting, they're not going to take their kid out of there. So basically, you would be saying like some of the same incentives that are for a private business would now be there for this public school, and that's what you want. You don't want people to basically what you're saying is like, no, the money needs to stay there, so like a kid could be forced to stay there against their parents' will because we want these public schools around. It's like, well, wait a minute, I thought it was about quality education. So if it's about quality education, you should want the student and the parent to, especially the parent, because student being underage, you would want the parent to be satisfied with the education their child's getting instead of being forced to not only, whether they have to pay for it or not, but forced to leave their child in a school where they don't think their kid is getting the best education. They should at least, my thing would be to completely, we have a whole other thing with it being based on property taxes, which is based on your zip code, and all that stuff's ridiculous too. But the best thing, again, is to have the government completely out of it. People get to keep their money and make their own choices with it. I think you could get a much better education system based out of that, especially considering even with private school and homeschool, that curriculum has to be approved through the government anyways. So getting the government out of education would just be better all around. You would get way better options in private school. You get better options in homeschooling, and we could get the costs down. I mean, it's not like we haven't done this before. We did this before the government got involved in education, just like we did it before government got involved in healthcare, just like we did it before government got involved in college. All this shit was way cheaper and way more accessible.
And you also had a lot more, like I was saying earlier, the necessity to go to college. Why in a lot of trade professions now do you have to have an associate's or a bachelor's degree? 30 years, you just got taught on the job. It was on the job training. Why did you have to go and spend, $30,000-$40,000 to get that piece of paper and not have experience? And then a lot of times have the piece of paper. Now you make the college degree worthless.
Yeah, and you also had a lower minimum wage, which let people accept lower pay for on-the-job training. Whereas, like you make it $15 an hour, well, the idea of an apprenticeship now changes more than it did even in the past. You get that higher barrier to entry where somebody has to get in if they got to be paid $15 an hour to come in and just learn the job. Now they're way less likely to get the experience they need to get the job because they can't even get their foot in the door because it's just another barrier to entry. So again, I mean, there's a lot of good conversations here, man. I think we're going to be able to have a lot of shit to talk about, whether it's Biden or not. Just some of these basic concepts of how the government's intentions to help so often hurt. That's a huge part of why things are the way they are. But if you don't have anything else, man, we've gone for an hour and 17 minutes here. I think it was a good conversation.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think it went good.
Oh, yeah.
Look forward to the next one.
Oh, yeah. On to episode 3. All right. Later, everybody, I do have that video that's going to be up. I might put it up here in a little bit. Just go ahead and make it live. I was waiting because, the time with all the election and stuff. I was like, nobody gives a shit about healthcare right now. Everybody's scrambling over fucking who's going to be president. But we'll move on into episode 3. Later, everybody.